When you understand what belonging is versus what fitting in is, you're evaluating every single environment you go into, expecting that the environment is going to give you belonging. And that's not actually true. And it's not actually true because we haven't been socialized to create belonging. We've been socialized to create fitting in.
Hey there, and welcome to Work is Third. I'm your host, Dawn Hunter, and I'm so glad you're here. Here's a question for you. Do you belong or do you just fit in? Today's guest is someone who named something most of us have felt but maybe can't articulate, what it actually means to belong. Andrea D. is an organizational scientist, adjunct professor, and keynote speaker whose research on belonging has been validated across 8 industries and over 150,000 people. We talk about the nervous system, psychological safety, and why the environment and not the person is usually what's failing. It is such a good episode. Let's listen in. Hello, Andrea, and welcome to Work is Third.
Hey, Dawn. It's so great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm really excited to have this conversation with you because I want to talk about all things belonging, and it's rooted in data, the work that you do. So super excited to dive into this conversation. But before we do, I'm hoping you can share a word to describe how you're doing today.
Well, one word, I'm going to use what you just said. I'm going to say excited because I'm super excited to share this work.
Great. Yeah. I know that when we first connected, you could tell that this is something that you're so passionate about. So I'm glad that you're also excited to be here and share it today. I think listeners are in for a real treat.
Well, I always joke that belonging started at my kitchen table because I have 2 neurodivergent teenagers now and a neurodivergent husband. And so a lot of this work was really personal because I was looking at, why can't we name and talk about what continues to happen in places where people don't belong and how that actually impacts whether or not you get to your full performance or your optimal conditions or not. And so for me, this work is incredibly personal, but I love that I have the organizational scientist in me who, couldn't stop. And I needed to look for framework and I needed to look for ways to explain the pain that I continue to see in so many families and in so many workplaces.
Really appreciate you sharing that story. And I'm struck by one thought, which is I never really even thought about what it means to be neurodivergent in the workforce, probably until like the last 5 to 10 years or so. It's not something I can't remember a workplace where that was a topic of conversation. Now I think it's much more prevalent. And I guess I'm curious about like your own observations on how has the world shifted to where this is something that we're just much more attentive to than we used to be.
There's people who often will say, oh, well, more people are just being misdiagnosed as neurodivergent. And I look at it a little bit differently. I look at it the fact that every single generation that we have, science improves, our understanding improves, our research improves. And so for me, I look at all of the people who lived generations before that didn't actually have any support and how much harder it was for them. Obviously, times have changed, but we really see with neurodivergent tendencies, how should I put this? Neurodivergent people can't mask what other people learn how to hide. So I'll put it that way. And what they show you, if you're paying attention, is what's actually happening in the nervous system. The difference is that it's just visible with their brain and with their behavior. And so when I watch my children walk into an environment that isn't clear, that's unpredictable, where rules keep changing, I have watched them shut down in real time. Not as, a behavior problem, but as and even a physical body problem. And they're not choosing to disengage. They're not choosing to behave badly. They're not choosing to not show up in the way that the environment wants them to. It's that their system has assessed the environment and it's immediately been deemed unsafe and they will withdraw accordingly. And I think that's the thing that we have to keep in mind with anyone. I mean, it's heightened for neurodivergent brains, but neurotypical brains, when you recognize, and often your body experiences it before you have the language or the cognition to actually understand what's happening, but you can feel it. And that's why I always say that belonging is the science you can feel. And so, if I look at going back to that, the kitchen table is where a lot of my learning started. I would say that what I had to build at home, structure, predictability, explicit naming of what was done well, repair conversations after really hard conversations or hard experiences with other family members. That's actually where I think a lot of it started, because it was the recognition of pain. But it's identical to what the research says the organization needs. And so I don't believe that people go to work and just put on a professional hat and then they're just in their professional self. All of our research also shows that what you get at work, you take home from work. What you take home into your house, you amplify, and then you take that back to work the next day. So it's this cycle. And so that phrase of misdiagnosis just really triggers my brain to go into, telling somebody that they need to try harder. What is the environment doing to actually help them succeed? And most of the time, the environment is actually failing the person, not the other way around. And so that's kind of the integration between personal and professional, if you will.
Yeah, there are so many things, so many threads I want to follow. One of them being that I work in the field of public health. And so we're very much focused on how systems need to change to promote wellness rather than individual behavior. But I also am personally drawn to the conversation about structure.
It's funny because I do think when you look at generational change, and this is something that we see all the time in the workplace as well, because we have all of the generations in the workplace right now. Each generation is essentially not looking at how the other generation belongs. And so we have these incredible conflicts and crises that are happening. And so what I find so fascinating about, back then, today, in the future, is that we keep looking to the past, trying to fix what the present is, when we actually need complete infrastructure rebuilds, because where we were in the past doesn't actually support where we are today. And I think that we need to talk a little bit about that. I think we have to talk a little bit about the fact that we're in this crisis. There's actually 3 epidemics happening right now. So we're not dealing with just one problem, right? We're dealing with 3 that feed into each other. So we have the loneliness epidemic, we have the mental health crisis, we have workplace toxicity as highest recorded levels. Workplace toxicity increased from 66% to 80% in a year from 2024 to 2025. Those aren't separate issues, right? It's the same wound showing up in different rooms. And when Gallup reported workplace toxicity at an all-time high, and when the Surgeon General of the United States issued, an advisory on loneliness as a public health emergency, that's no coincidence. That's a system fundamentally breaking down. And I feel that we actually have a belonging infrastructure failure, not a people failure, not a generation failure, an infrastructure failure. And what we are doing today is that we're optimizing everything for speed, everything for convenience, everything for individual performance. And we're dismantling anything that's relational, anything that's interdependent, and also the conditions that hold people together. And so the scaffolding is coming down. It's why we have an estrangement epidemic that really needs to be talked about. So loneliness, think of loneliness as the ache of being alone. Estrangement is the withdrawal of trust. Loneliness data shows that globally, 1 in 6 person worldwide is affected. It's linked to about 100 deaths every hour, about 871,000 annually. Okay. Global estrangement, that's the second component to that, shows that, 1 in 4 globally has a family member estranged. That number rises in the US. It's 1 in 2 estranged from a family member. We know that trust is down, right? Trust in leaders, trust in each other's, trust in families, trust in communities. All of that's down. And then with that, global empathy scores have been declining for over a decade. So the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report, it came out either end of December, beginning of January. But what it does is it actually links rising loneliness, polarization, and what they're now calling the age of anger with online connections producing empathy at 6 times a weaker rate than real world interactions. So people aren't just lonely, they've stopped actually believing that the community is safe, and they're kind of retreating to these devices and things where friction doesn't have to be in their existence. So when that happens at work, when employees don't trust their leaders, when teams stop extending goodwill, you don't just get disengagement. You get people showing up, they're staying, they're there. The engagement scores look fine, for example. But they're out, like their brains are offline, their effort, their trust, their creativity, all of that's gone. Numbers are basically just a lag indicator. And I would say that that's actually true in family and community right now because they're all interconnected. And that's the danger. It doesn't actually show up on your dashboard until it's super expensive. And then what happens at work goes home, what happens at home comes back, right? So I think that's where I looked at belonging as an infrastructure and going, okay, belonging is something we all need, just like food and water. Without it, we'll die. And yet, I think most people feel the feeling, but don't actually understand what actually brings your brain into experiencing belonging. I needed to understand so I could create infrastructure that actually allowed that performance to come back online.
I would love to pause here and actually think about what is the definition of belonging, because we started out talking about people who are neurotypical or neurodivergent, but it also applies to gender and race and ethnicity. And it's really, I think often about when I walk into the room and I'm the only one who looks like me. I could still feel a sense of belonging in that room. It really depends on other factors. And so I'm wondering if for listeners, you can define what is belonging. And then you were talking a lot about infrastructure. What is belonging infrastructure?
Yeah, so let's dive into both of those. I want to stick kind of similarly to your workplace well-being because I'm sure that you've talked about in some capacity how the body keeps score.
Yes, often.
Okay. So, I just want to kind of stay with this because I think your listeners will appreciate this and they'll understand it. When we're in environments where we fit in, which means that 100% of my ability to succeed, to thrive, to perform at my best depends on me decoding the entire environment. All of that accountability and responsibility is on myself. That's a fitting in environment. That's what we typically live in today. That's how we've been socialized. Belonging is different. Belonging is where you have 50-50. It means that I'm responsible for you, Dawn, just as much as I'm responsible for me. And the reason I wanted to talk a little bit about this is because the science that makes belonging actionable rather than aspirational actually comes back to that feeling of knowing that you are safe enough to perform at your best. But the body keeps score, right? And so if we start by looking at Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory, and what Porges does is he maps something that most leaders have never been taught. Most people have never been taught. That the human nervous system is constantly, and I mean constantly, it never stops when you are awake. It is constantly scanning the environment for signals of safety or threat. And he called this process neuroception. And imagine your employee walks into meeting. Their nervous system has already assessed the entire room, everyone that is in there, before a single word is spoken. Okay. It's asking, is this safe? Can I trust these people? Am I valued here? Will I be punished if I'm honest? And if there is a sense, doesn't even depend necessarily on words yet. If there is a sense that the answer is yes, then the ventral vagal system goes, oh, okay, I'm safe here. Nervous system settles down. Cortisol, woo, 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 drops. The brain opens up. I can be creative. I can be collaborative. I can take risks. I can share what I'm really thinking. I can make decisions. I can work. How many people go to work and don't work? They're not working. They're scanning for all of the politicking and all of the stuff that's happening. So when the answer is no, or even maybe, that threat response stays active. And cortisol will flood the system. The brain can't actually think, and people stay in that self-protection mode. And so they perform tasks, but they can't really perform at their best. They comply, but they're not at their peak. And they can't be at their peak because their brain is working on half capacity. It's always watching for when the next threat is going to come. So when you think about that, the organizational implication to that is that you can't train your way out of a threat response.
Ooh.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can't motivate your brain out of a threat response. You have to build conditions that tell the nervous system, hey, I'm safe. You can do this here. That's belonging infrastructure. Okay. That's what the 5 indicators of belonging do. They are at the core 5 neurological safety signals that allow people to perform at their best. There's one other thing that I want to kind of touch on here is that if we layer in then this 50-50 concept, right? So this is actually really important. And this actually comes from James Cone's social baseline theory. And what Cone's research showed was that the human brain treats social connection like a baseline resource. Okay. It's not like a luxury. It's not a bonus. It is a metabolic necessity. So when we're connected to people that we trust, the brain literally works less hard, but performs better. Okay. So it's basically outsourcing both cognitive and emotional load from the relationship. So practically, what does this mean? It means that a person who belongs uses less energy to do the same work as a person who doesn't. They have more left over for innovation, problem solving, resilience. They recover faster. They can tolerate more uncertainty. But when it's absent, when belonging infrastructure is missing, you're operating in this fitting in environment where 100% of your acceptance is on whether you can figure out the rules well enough. And so the brain has to compensate so much more. It's working harder just to feel stable. And so when you look at 2 people together, one has belonging and one does not, the person who doesn't is doing more work. They might be doing the same work, but the scaffolding that they need that would normally share that cognitive emotional load doesn't exist. I think that becomes really important because as AI increases, we're kind of gutting human interdependence. And so we really do need infrastructure to rebuild. And otherwise, I kind of think about this from a macro level. Otherwise, we're just reinforcing that people are meant to carry the loads alone. And that's actually not how we are designed. You know, we have all these symptoms, burnout, disengagement, quiet quitting. But I actually think that the real diagnosis is that we're being belonging deprived.
That really is powerful to think about. And it's really relevant in my field in public health. One of the things I do in my work is promote care and connection in the workplace and the role of policy in making sure that we have the conditions in the workplace to make people feel cared for, to make people feel connected, to create spaces for connection, because it is how we perform best. And I don't think this is new. You know, you were talking about engagement earlier, and I remember looking at a Gallup graph. Maybe it was, I think, 2024 data, but it was like 33% of the workforce is engaged in the US, and then 16% is actively disengaged. And it's mind-blowing to think of how many people are showing up to work and they're just not engaged in their environment. But to hear you describe the science behind it, it's also like, wow, if my mental energy is going to making sure I'm ready to respond to a threat, of course I can't give my best self to anything else that I'm doing. So the question that comes to mind for me is, if we know this, why are we still not doing it? Why are we letting AI and all these other kind of social factors continue to reinforce that independence or independent action rather than connection?
Yeah. So I think if you don't mind, I'm gonna go into the 5 indicators first. And the reason I want to go into the 5 indicators first is because we're not actually using language that translates across experiences. In order to experience belonging, your brain actually has to experience these 5 indicators. And I want to stress that not only do they work as a system, but each of them came out of the data. These aren't like categories I just invented. They're actually the language that was used across. Now we're over 150,000 people, but it started with those 3,500. If you pull one of the indicators out, the whole system becomes strained. So I'll talk about the behavior and then I'll talk about the brain piece just to kind of give a better understanding of them first. So comfort is like your cortisol regulator. And it's the signal that says you don't have to be on guard here. And comfort's experienced in the brain when there is clarity, predictability, awareness of like what the rules are or how to succeed. And so these actually tell your nervous system, you can stand down, it's safe. Comfort is not like there's no conflict. Comfort is not everybody's nice here. Actually, when people are too nice, when everyone's nice, your brain is going into complete threat mode because you don't trust that they are being sincere. People pick up on that right away. So comfort is when the structure is predictable enough that you can remain regulated. Okay. When an environment is ambiguous, when expectations are unclear, when an identity feels like it's a liability, when the structure itself is unpredictable, that's when your amygdala like elevates threat detection, cortisol stays elevated, and your brain stays in that threat scan mode. Okay. So that's where your ability to think, decision make, all of that goes offline because your brain is staying in self protection. And so none of that other cognitive ability can actually happen.
Yeah. So the question I have is really, does this vary by individual? And what I mean by that is, as you were talking, I was thinking about environments where some people perceive the rules and structure to be very clear and they feel very safe, whereas another person can be in the exact same environment and feel threatened. So is there something that is kind of a universal experience, and then is there individual nuance as well?
Now, remember that all of the wording specifically came from the research. It is all of the same statistically validated people saying, in order for me to be in this environment, I need predictability, I need clarity, I need understanding. People are going to experience that slightly different, but you need to have the language of what's going on in order to identify where it differs from one to another. And I think that's what these 5 indicators initially give, is they give the overarching framework so that you can say, okay, well, if this is breaking down, I have language to actually help you here. And we'll get into that language. But without those indicators, you end up talking in circles, or something specific that can actually bring your brain back online isn't able to come back online because you don't have framework to start with. And so you need the framework in order for you to be specific about where is belonging actually even breaking down. What I would say, and I think it's really important, Dawn, that you actually articulated that and brought it up, and I'm really happy that you did, because I think that, so before I go into connection, one of the things that I think is so important is that your experiences that you've had in your life will trigger you to stay in threat scan mode faster than others, depending on what those experiences have been. And so we have to acknowledge that, but then we also have to have language that translates across so that we know where to start and where that belonging is breaking down. So we can sit and go, okay, this isn't that it's Dawn's fault because she doesn't feel comfort here. It means it's the environment's fault that we're not giving Dawn what she needs. And how do we bridge that together to actually allow both parties to experience it. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's very helpful. I love the idea of having the language, but also you bring to mind like trauma-informed workplaces, right? So that we are understanding that people are bringing, as you said in the beginning, whatever happened at home and today, but also 20 years ago, you're bringing into the workplace with you. And we have to be cognizant of that. So yes, I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you. Connection. That's where I was. So connection is like oxytocin activator. So it's really about trust rather than transactions. And it's about reciprocity, interdependence. There's this sense that people around you want to know you as a person, not just as a function or what you're producing. They want to know you. They want to know how you think. They want to know what you're good at, what lights you up, where you don't want to be. Right? They want to actually know you. And that was something in the research that came up over and over and over again. Connection was about bonding, but it was really about knowing that person enough that you knew that they were going to have your back. And when this is present, people actually extend goodwill. When that knowing or wanting to know of someone is absent, everything becomes transactional. So remember, I had talked about the polyvagal theory that talks about when social cues are absent, inconsistent, or threatening. That's where like social disengagement happens. That's also where our older defense circuitry is activated. So you just talked about how your lifetime of activation lives. This is also in connection. And so connection is what moves two people or a group into more of that empathetic coexistence. We work in the same building is sympathetic. Empathetic is we're in this together. I trust that you have my back. And that is actually a physiological distinction before it becomes a cognitive one. So that's why there's all of these fun sayings like, oh, birds of a feather. All that is that your brain is picking up on likeness, which leads to trust. But if wanting to know you doesn't happen within the first 60 seconds, then that actually triggers your brain that this is a threatening connection, that this is going to be transactional. And so what's also fascinating about connection is that you actually kind of need friction to build it. Easy relationships don't produce real oxytocin mediated trust. You have to navigate through something together. You have to want to know and want to be in it. And so, connection, I look at it like it's not like a motivational, like nice to have. It's like a bioenergetic resource that the brain treats just like oxygen or glucose. I like to think of it, when we think of it like that, it's like when that social resource is absent, the brain, because it's working metabolically so much harder, isolation is actually really expensive. It's cognitively expensive. It's emotionally expensive. Belonging is actually cognitively and emotionally efficient. Let's go into contribution. So contribution is all about dopamine and serotonin. For those of you who love checklists like I do, I need structure. I do really well in structure. I've always had to create a lot of structure because I grew up in chaos. So Dawn, you and I are like reverse engineered of each other. So I needed structure in order for me to survive the chaos that I was constantly in. And when I look at checklists, so we've gamified our checklists, right? If you're in Teams and you've put like a note to yourself and you finish that note and you click it, it makes a bing noise, right? Or if you even have, like your tasks open and you click it, it makes a bing noise. And that bing noise, they've actually honed in on that because from a neuroscience perspective, that bing noise, that bing of like, ooh, I got a task done, that actually fires or makes our brain fire dopamine. And dopamine makes us feel good because it's our reward hormone. And so it says to us, hey, your work matters. My effort matters. I'm making a meaningful contribution or impact. What's interesting about dopamine is that as long as you're getting that feedback, it's feeding your brain and it's giving you a good feeling. But if your brain can't prove and see in proof that what you're doing actually does matter and that you are actually making a significant impact on something, you don't actually have a serotonin signal show up. What happens then is that your reward prediction actually gives you an error. And so what's fascinating about that is basically your brain doesn't just need to do meaningful things. It needs evidence through feedback loops that the work is making a difference. And if it doesn't have that, people stop actually bringing effort, not because they're lazy, but because their brain stops getting that reward signal that produces desire to keep going. And so most leaders think recognition means praise. But neuroscience actually says that people need visibility of their impact. And those are not the same thing. And so when the brain registers invisible contributions, that actually gives your brain evidence that you don't belong. So when I look at recognition, contribution specifically, you need to be able to prove that you're part of something. That's what creates contribution. That's what makes you want to stay and continue to move through challenges and achieve something with other people.
So what is a really simple way that people do that? Praise, right? You mentioned that's not enough, but a lot of, I think, things are praise adjacent, if you will. And so what is a real simple, practical way that people can actually visibly recognize someone and give them that positive reinforcement?
Yeah, absolutely. So it can be as simple as saying, so you have to be specific. Dawn, your comment about the baggage that we bring forward or the trauma we bring into the workplace was actually really central to me being able to explain the next portion of belonging. We have to be able to say, and I'm using this example simply because you did this, Dawn, and so it's great for me to just be able to model it back to you. In a workplace, imagine that somebody has brought an idea to the table that was mainly, let's say it was dismissed. And then all of a sudden somebody brought it back and you built on it. And then you ended up with this, great outcome. A leader being able to say, do you know, this success actually needs to go back to, I'm going to use your name again. It needs to go back to Dawn. When Dawn said this, that actually made us think of XYZ, which brought us to taking action on this. So being able to say so-and-so, and what's fascinating is that, remember that my research started in the mining industry. And so a lot of the people that I was working with were men who were engineers who, if you were to prototype them or look at some of the ways that we would think of engineering brains, they're not warm and fuzzy people. Okay. They are facts, cognitive, analytical. What do we need to do? What was fascinating about this specific indicator was that when we were doing the qualitative work and we were testing in the workplace after we had looked at the research, you had a room of engineers who were together. And when we looked at having each one of them identify one key contribution that their peer made in the room on why they were able to get to that impact, every single person at that table felt that they mattered. That was a significant change in how they then continued to show up. And so it's something, it seems like it's really hard, but once you actually have the structure, it's very easy to go, okay, this is where the breakdown is, or this is where we're struggling, and this is the language that I need, and this is the conversation. So it might seem a lot, but it's actually, once you have those 5 indicators, it's very easy to go, okay, what are we actually dealing with right now in this moment? And that's why I said you can see it in real time. Do you want me to go into psychological safety or?
Yeah, because we did comfort, connection, contribution. Is psychological safety 4?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So psychological safety, and of course, Amy Edmondson, queen of psychological safety, her work is just phenomenal. Millions of dollars, billions maybe, have been spent. I don't know. But I know a lot.
A lot.
A lot has been spent on psychological safety. Her work is so relevant, so needed. Here's where it's interesting, though. It's only 1/5 of belonging. So psychological safety is what reduces the threat response enough to allow you to take a risk. It's not comfort. It's about permission. It's about protection. It's the permission to speak up. It's the protection to speak up, to disagree, to make mistakes, to try, to admit, to challenge without that fear of social punishment. And remember, social punishment is actually what our brains are always looking for in the background. So without it, we are going to self-censor. We're going to keep our best ideas internal. We're not going to report problems. And the reason that psychological safety is so important, and I'm trying to be precise with this, is that it's again, not about being in an environment that has no friction or conflict or change. It's that when you're in that condition, your brain can still take intelligent risks, and it can still keep coming back and try something new and admit a mistake and challenge a bad idea without that social threat response shutting you down. And so psychological safety protects your brain and keeps you willing to keep coming back. So it protects you through the friction. And here's something that's also really important, is that social threat activates the same neural circuitry as physical threat. We talked about this a little bit, but rejection, exclusion, humiliation, shame, they light up the brain's pain processing regions. So when psychological safety is low, the threat of social punishment actually triggers physical punishment, which is why all of that trauma that you bring in is so quickly triggered if you're in another environment where you don't have belonging. And so in that environment, people are going to only execute the minimum just to keep protecting themselves. So you're going to get compliance, but you're not going to get performance. I'm just looking at time and I'm like, oh my gosh, we haven't gotten through well-being. Okay. So well-being, because this is so important to your podcast and your listeners. So well-being is actually what regulates the stress recovery cycle. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about an athlete. An athlete is never performing at their maximum output every single minute of the day. Okay. Athlete trains, athlete performs, athlete recovers. Your nervous system operates like this too. You have to go into stress. It's what pushes you to keep growing, to keep showing up, to keep performing. And then you have to go into a recovery cycle. Okay. So you're always going through that stress recovery. And that rhythm of effort, rest, challenge, recovery, when well-being infrastructure is absent, people who are operating in chronic states of stress and in chronically stressed nervous systems, they can't get their nervous systems back online because all their body is trying to do is survive. So when we look at well-being, one of the things that I get really passionate about is that resilience is not a solo sport. Bouncing back is not a solo sport. An app, Pizza Friday, that is not going to help you recover. Okay. When we look at sustained stress activation without genuine windows of recovery, it is like your organization is chronically overtraining you. And the physiological cost actually takes all of those other indicators and it degrades them too. So your comfort can't hold if your nervous system is never allowed to downgrade. Leaders who treat burnout as a personal resilience failure are really misreading the physiology, because I can't say to you, Dawn, here's an app, go listen to this meditation, go do this thing, follow these bounce back training guidelines. And if you can come back and be your normal self, amazing, you're amazing. But if you can't, too bad. That's essentially how we treat resilience training. And what's fascinating, again, it still plays into those two other elements of like how socially integrated and interdependent we are, is that if you look at all of the research from natural disasters, Hurricane Katrina, even what's happening now, when you look at the social networks that people have, if people have a network where you are recovering together, where you are working together, where you are asking, how can I help you? What do you need off your plate? What do we need to prioritize? Those infrastructure elements allow you to recover 40 to 60% faster than somebody who does not have a network of people. And so when you're in an organization, recovery isn't a reward for good performance. Recovery and well-being are a prerequisite for sustained performance. So that's belonging. That's all of it together. All five of them are a system. When you have the infrastructure, that's really where the feeling can be replicated, and it's not just certain people that are allowed to belong.
Yeah, I think that you did such a great job of both explaining what creates belonging, but then also, giving examples of what does this look like, which were the two questions that we led into this portion with. So I appreciate that. And I'm curious because I'm looking at the time as well. And we started this conversation talking about like your personal entryway into this work. And then we've talked a lot about what this looks like at a societal level. And what I hope to do is bring it back to you as a person and how you apply this in your own life, maybe, but also eventually to get to asking you the questions that I ask everyone about how they take care of themselves. But before we get into those questions, I am curious about, what would be your elevator pitch for, especially for people who are not very driven by data or evidence. And what is the elevator pitch to say, this is a good thing for you to do?
Well, I think the thing that I would say is this: because belonging is measurable, it's fixable. And you don't have to guess at what's broken when you have 5 indicators where you can actually run a survey and see. And you can diagnose it, and you can then work through it systematically and build it. And so for people who are just kind of thinking about like, how does this apply? I actually created a free assessment. It's called the Belonging Health Check. It's literally 5 minutes. It's 10 questions, 5 about yourself, 5 about one other person that maybe you're having some belonging friction or fragility with. And what it does is it actually just gives you a clear picture of what's strong and what's quietly failing. And if anything in this conversation resonated, if you're a leader whose team, feels distant, even when the numbers look okay, or if you're in HR and you're watching people leave and you can't figure out why, go take it. It's belongingfirst.com/belonging breakdown. And what I always say is you can't fix what you can't see. You can't change what you don't have language for. And most organizations can't see it and they don't have the language. And that's exactly what we're here to change.
I love that. We will make sure that we include the links in the show notes, including to a lot of the research that you mentioned. I would love to link that for listeners, being a research and data nerd myself. And now what I would like to do is, number one, I would like to take the quiz myself, but then also ask you the 4 questions to wrap us up, if you're ready.
Yeah, go for it. Let's do it.
So when I think of care in the workplace, I often talk about boundaries. And so these questions, I think, are related into the things that make us feel a sense of belonging, because boundaries are what help us to create a safe space, help us to know that we can interact with certain people or set the rules for interacting with certain people and things like that. So that's kind of where these questions are rooted. And the first question is, what is something that it's easy for you to say yes to?
Well, I am a recovering people pleaser. And so belonging, it's interesting because I operated in fitting in environments for so long that I didn't understand where I was fitting in versus where I was belonging. And so, as somebody who loves to be part of and who is an overachiever. I would say that building this framework was as much for myself and my own well-being as it was for my kids and my husband and all of the organizations that I work with. I now have language that, when I'm feeling that there's a fracture in the relationship or somebody who I'm working with or somebody who's in my personal life, I actually use I will do that quick assessment that I've built. I built it for myself because when you understand what belonging is versus what fitting in is, you're evaluating every single environment you go into, expecting that the environment is going to give you belonging. And that's not actually true. And it's not actually true because we haven't been socialized to create belonging. We've been socialized to create fitting in. So I still would say that my well-being rests in my belonging to myself first, and in creating the conditions that I can follow so that I know that I'm always showing up. And that doesn't always mean that everyone belongs in your life. What it means is that there's a process of knowing when you can show up and when it's safe for you to step back.
I love everything you said. Also a recovering people pleaser, and went through my own exploration of the same thing, fitting in versus belonging. And I also deeply appreciate that you have created something that you also use. And so the second question is then, what is something that is hard for you to say no to?
What is easy for me to say no to?
Hard to say no to.
Hard to say no to. Maybe I'm mixing the conversation up. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Easy to say no to. I would say that is doing things just for the sake of doing things. And yet looking at where things that are inconvenient are actually really important of how we create interdependence and how we show up for each other. So I think it's saying yes to progress. I think it's saying yes to the messy middle. I think it's saying I can give myself grace when things aren't as perfect as I want them to be. And that because I belong, I can be this human, this flawed human, and know that I have this incredible support system that continues to champion me forward.
I'm going to really simply kind of say that I think this is saying no to perfection or perfectionism.
Dawn, I think you just hit on my researcher academic brain that needs to spew out 12 words instead of 3. Thank you.
This is perfect. So the last 2 questions are related to each other, which is really, thinking about the ways that you create belonging, the ways that you prioritize well-being and belonging to yourself. What is something that you do really well in caring for yourself, and where is something that you still struggle with?
Yeah. So something that I do really well is give myself breaks so that I don't burn out. I love what I do. And I'm one of those people that I could work hours upon hours because I'm so engaged and I'm so interested and I love my clients and I love the organizations and I love seeing the data. Giving myself pause is something that I do really well now because I know that's what sustains me and it's what allows my body to recover.
Then where do you struggle?
I would say, where do I struggle? I struggle in changing up my routine. So the brain also needs different experiences. And because I'm so routine based, I struggle when there's change. So I actually have to have a protocol for when things are a little bit unpredictable for me. So it gets my brain calm and goes, okay, you're fine. You can do this. This is not a problem. Yeah, that's where I struggle.
Okay. I feel like we are very much the same person. Because I also need routine, and when I don't have it, I do feel chaotic. Even if nothing is chaos, my brain says there's chaos.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing with us your answers to those questions and wonder if there's any last thought that you would want to share with listeners before we wrap up for the day.
All I would say is belonging starts with yourself. And all of us are going to walk into rooms and we're either going to regulate them or we're going to dysregulate them, just as we will be regulated or dysregulated. And so when we know what our belonging indicators are, it makes it so much easier for us to show up for ourselves so that we can be in environments where we can be in service to others. So work on your own belonging first, and please reach out. Follow me on LinkedIn, Andrea D. Carter. I've got a couple of books coming out, so I'd love to have you follow me and stay in touch.
Thank you, Andrea, for being here on Work is Third.
Thank you, Dawn. It's been a pleasure.
Andrea gave us language for something I think a lot of us experience but don't actively question. If this one hit different, share it with somebody who needs to hear it, a colleague, a leader, or a friend who's been struggling at work. Remember, work is third. Put yourself first.